Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs in the Paranormal. Today's episode I call 50 UFO Photos from California. People are always talking about if UFOs are real, where's the evidence? And the truth is, there is an enormous amount of evidence, and many different types of evidence. Landing traces, of course, medical evidence, electromagnetic effects, animal reactions, radar returns. But I think certainly among the most interesting types of evidence is photographic evidence. And that's what I want to talk about today. California has had an enormous number of encounters. In fact, it leads the nation in the number of encounters, according to the National UFO Reporting Center. So it should come as no surprise that there are a lot of photographic cases. And I'd like to present to you what I think are probably the 50 best UFO photographs taken in California. A few of these are quite well known. Many are very well verified, vetted by UFO researchers and photographic experts. Some are not. Some have just a little bit of information and have not been fully investigated. But I think all of them are quite interesting. So let's just get started. The first photograph I'd like to present to you, there's not a lot known about it. All we really know is that this was taken over Catalina Island during the day, apparently by a tourist. And it shows a metallic craft high in the sky. What I like about this photograph is it was taken very early in terms of UFO history. This was before the modern age of UFOs, sometime in the 1940s, perhaps earlier. It's a very interesting daylight photo of a solid metallic craft, and it's one of the earliest taken in California. This next photograph, pictured here, was taken in February 1942 during what is known as the LA Air Raid, or the Battle of LA. On that evening, the entire city of Los Angeles went into an enforced blackout because numerous unidentified craft were seen coming in over the city from the Pacific Ocean. Some of these were quite small, but one was very large, the one pictured here, with searchlights trained on it. This very large object moved in over Culver City and sort of parked there for a period of about 2 hours, during which the Army trained searchlights on it and fired about 1,400 rounds of ammunition at it. They were unable to bring it down, whatever this object was. It was totally silent. The only result was that 5 people died from falling debris, car accidents, heart attacks, this sort of thing. After about 2 hours, this object moved away back over the Pacific Ocean and off into the distance. There was some debunking explanations that this was perhaps a dirigible or Japanese aircraft. There's no evidence of that. In fact, I talked to a first-hand witness, and he said there was no way these were balloons or normal conventional aircraft. He saw one of these smaller objects swoop down quite low over his home. The next day, this photo appeared on the cover of the LA Times. And while there was initially a cover-up enacted of this event, today there are documents released through the Freedom of Information Act, declassified documents showing that our own government did not know what this object was, and it remains a mystery to this day. It's one of the best authenticated UFO photographs in California history. And that's why I wanted to include it on this list. And now we move to the next case. July 8, 1943, when 3 visiting Army veterans reported their observations of 6 flying discs over Catalina Island. The 6 discs appeared around 1 p.m. and flew in formation. First there was one set of 3 discs, followed later by another set of 3 discs, Each moved at high speed, appeared from the northeast, and passed directly over Avalon. And according to the veterans, hundreds of people were present and also observed the discs. One of the gentlemen, Alvio Russo, had flown more than 35 bombing missions over Germany, and he estimated that these objects were moving at 850 miles per hour. But that evening, Bob Young, an aerial photographer, said that these objects flew as fast as the Navy Tiny Tim rocket, which he had photographed many times. And when the UFOs appeared, again, he managed to quickly snap this photograph pictured here. Moving along, here is a very famous picture of a UFO, which was taken in Burbank, California in 1945. The gentleman featured here is Jack LeMond, who is on his horse, on horseback near the Pickwick riding stables in Burbank, California. This was a June morning in 1945. The UFO was not noticed at the time this picture was taken, but as you can see, Jack LeMond was in full military uniform. He had served in the South Pacific with the U.S. Marine Corps. But when this photograph was developed, you could see this clear picture of a classic flying saucer, what looks like a solid metallic object in the sky. It's really quite intriguing. This next photo, there's not a whole lot known about it, only that it was taken by a gentleman by the name of Joe McBride. This photograph has been featured many, many times. It was taken in the Mojave Desert in 1950, but otherwise there's not a whole lot else known about it. But I wanted to include it here because it's a very famous photograph. This next photograph was taken in 1951. As you can see, we're moving through time. But this photograph was taken near Riverside, California on November 23rd, 1951 by a gentleman by the name of Guy B. Marquand Jr. This is an excellent photograph which has never been debunked or explained. And according to Guy, he said he saw this object just above the skyline, a flying saucer. Guy Marquand was enlisted in the U.S. Army in L.A., and he was single. He had 4 years of high school, came from Riverside. He saw this object and managed to capture this photograph pictured here. He lived to be quite elderly, lived in Carlsbad, California with his wife, and has never backed down, saying that this photograph displays exactly what he saw way back in 1951. This next photograph was taken in August of 1952 by the 15-year-old son of a California surgeon. His name is Michael Savage, and he snapped a photo of this object which was hovering near these power lines in San Bernardino. And he tried to get a second shot, but in his haste, he overcranked the camera and drew a blank negative. But he said that this object was hovering near his house for about 30 seconds. And this photograph was, in fact, published in the newspapers. It caused quite a sensation, and no one has ever been able to explain it. Here's an interesting photograph which was taken place on September 3rd, 1953 in Modesto, California. This photograph was taken by Charles Rogers, and it shows an unidentified elliptical-shaped yellowish light on the right, and the light appeared to remain stationary. So when he first saw it, he quickly set his camera up on the roof, left the shutter open, and got this result. No other information about this photograph is available, but it's certainly an interesting photograph of something unexplained in the sky. This next photograph is actually taken from a moving film. It caused quite a sensation at the time. This series of photographs, or moving film rather, was taken on April 15, 1956 by Leland Hansen, a Navy photographer. Leland Hansen was on assignment filming Catalina Island from a helicopter when he saw this object hovering in place. And when it started to move, he decided that he would film it. He started filming this object as it slowly moved away, and a later analysis of the film revealed that this object was featureless and oval-shaped with no apparent wings or tail structure. It was about 30 feet in diameter and moving at an estimated 130 to 170 miles per hour. The footage was first aired in 1979, 13 years after the incident, on the popular television documentary UFOs Are Real, produced by Brandon Chase. Scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory analyzed the footage and observed what they thought might be a tail rudder. However, the fact that the object was first seen hovering in place pretty much rules out the plane theory. Nor could JPL explain how Leland Hansen, a trained observer familiar with aircraft, would be unable to match what he saw to any known aircraft. So while some have tried to debunk the footage, this object has never been identified. This next photograph is an excellent photograph, which was taken by Joe Kurska on October 10, 1956, over the city of San Francisco. On that day, Joe Kurska, a commercial photographer, had climbed up to Twin Peaks to take a panoramic photograph of the city of San Francisco. It was around 12:30 p.m. when he heard a strange humming noise, and looking up, he saw a large disc-shaped craft with a dome on top zooming overhead. He was so shocked that at first he forgot about his camera, which was already set up and ready to go. And he was so disappointed that he didn't even think of getting a photograph when suddenly another identical craft moved ahead. This time he didn't hesitate, and he quickly snapped a photograph. And as you can see, this photo shows a silver metallic saucer less than 100 feet distant from the witness. It's a very famous photograph which has never been explained, and it's certainly one of the best photographs taken over California at that time. Here's another very interesting photograph which was taken in September of 1957 over Edwards Air Force Base. This was taken by a test pilot. A UFO was apparently following a B-57 twin jet. The UFO was not seen at the time this photograph was taken. However, when the photograph was developed, this object could be seen, and there's not a whole lot known about it because no one actually saw it, but it's absolutely an excellent photo for this time period. Not everyone sees the UFOs when they're taking a photograph. They only see it when the camera is developed. And that is exactly what happened in this next photograph, which was taken by a gentleman with the initials BC. He was at Lake Isabella in California in 1957, did not see anything unusual, but as you can see, he took a photograph, and this photo shows an unidentified disc-like object that looked like it was about to land. At the time, the gentleman who photographed this object and his fiancée were riding their Harley Davidson motorcycle in the south of the Sierra Nevadas when they decided to take a picture of the old dirt road that led to the dry lake bed. Again, they did not see anything strange when the photo was taken. Not until it was developed did they see this object. So I think that itself lends a degree of authenticity to it. It's clearly not a glitch in the photograph. It's very hard to explain this as anything other than a genuine UFO. Now here is another very interesting photograph, which is allegedly taken from a moving film taken at Edwards Air Force Base in 1958. Allegedly, this is a clip from a film that was leaked of a UFO landing at Edwards Air Force Base. Reportedly, this was a film which was viewed by the late astronaut Gordon Cooper, who was present at the time. In an interview with journalist Lee Spiegel, Gordon Cooper said that when he was project manager of the Flight Test Center at Edwards in 1958, a large metallic flying disc actually landed at the base. Several Air Force personnel observed the landing and were able to take motion pictures. And as Gordon Cooper says, the disc was hovering above the ground, and then it slowly came down and sat on the lake bed for a few minutes. There were various estimates by the cameramen on what the actual size of the object was, but they all agreed it was at least the size of a vehicle that would carry normal-sized people in it. It was a typical circular-shaped UFO. Not too many people saw it because it took off at quite a sharp angle and just climbed out of sight. I think it was definitely a UFO. So although Gordon Cooper didn't witness the actual craft, he did view the film, which he found very convincing. As per orders, he sent the film to Washington, D.C., and never heard from it again. However, on a later occasion, Stephen Greer, M.D., conducted a follow-up interview and confirmed the details of this encounter. And as astronaut Gordon Cooper is quoted as saying, "At Edwards Air Force Base, I was having some of the cameramen film precision landings, and we were right on the edge of a dry lake. A saucer flew over them, put down 3 landing gears, and landed out on the dry lake bed. They went out there with their cameras towards the UFO. It lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and flew off at a very high rate of speed and disappeared. So while I was going through all of the regulation books and finding out the number to call in Washington to report this, I had the cameraman go over and develop the film. By the time they got back with the developed film, I had higher and higher and higher level officers talking with me. Finally, a colonel told me that when the film arrived on my desk, to put it in a courier file. There would be a courier there at my office, and they would arrange for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films. The colonel said to not run the prints. So we stuck them in the courier packets." Now, Gordon Cooper did examine this film firsthand, and as he says, these were good close-up shots, nothing like I had ever seen. Double inverted saucer-shaped. It didn't have wings on it or anything. It was pretty much the same saucer shape. At that point in time, there was no doubt in my mind that it was made someplace other than here on Earth. And although this encounter was amazing, Gordon Cooper said that it wasn't unique. As he told Lee Spiegel, there were always strange things flying around in the air over Edwards. And I can absolutely confirm that. I did a whole YouTube episode on the events at Edwards Air Force Base, events which started at least as early as 1942 and continue up to the present day. So here is another excellent photo, which was taken over Lake Casitas, located just inland of the coast in Ventura. This is very near Santa Catalina Channel, an area of very high levels of UFO activity. In 1959, a dam was built which formed Lake Casitas, but one day in 1964, an Air Force pilot from World War II by the name of Frank S. Kinsey was at Lake Casitas with his brother-in-law when they heard a loud sound of splashing water. And as Frank Kinsey says, "I looked out into the lake, and here's this object coming out of the water." So this case was actually investigated by MUFON field investigator Robert D. Neville, who interviewed Frank Kinsey. Frank Kinsey told him that this object emerged from the water with such speed that it sucked up this large column of water, which came loudly crashing down. And this is what Frank and his brother-in-law heard. And as Frank says, "I was flabbergasted. It was a round object, and it looked like it had a cone on top where a person was looking out at us, a being looking out at us. I could see the eyes staring at us. I happened to have a pair of binoculars with me at the time. I picked them up and looked, and I could see a person looking out at me." According to Frank, this object was about 30 feet wide. The outside perimeter of the object appeared to be rotating, and it was emitting a painfully loud noise. You could see several portholes situated around the top cone section of the object, and it was through one of these portholes that he saw the being. He said that the window itself, quote, "looked like it was real thick, heavy glass of some kind, or maybe it might have been a plastic of some kind." As he watched, this object suddenly accelerated, glowing first a lavender color and then bright orange yellow. In just a few seconds, it was about 15 miles away, he estimates, and disappeared over the mountains. However, he was able to snap a photograph of it as it moved off. And as Frank Kinsey says, "It had a gleam to it. It had a shine to it, like nothing I'd ever seen. I've seen a lot of metals here on Earth that had a high gloss, but nothing like this that I've ever seen." As you can see, this photograph clearly shows a solid object. You can just make out the portholes. It's a shame he didn't get a photograph of it sooner where you could see this figure looking out of the portholes. But nevertheless, this is a very well authenticated, well vetted photograph of a UFO, or USO perhaps, coming out of Lake Casitas, a daylight photo, which is quite rare and again has never been explained. Probably California's best UFO photos were taken on August 3rd, 1965 by Los Angeles County Highway investigator Rex Heflin. Part of Rex Heflin's job included taking photos of car accidents, and because of this, he always carried a Polaroid camera next to him on the seat. And on August 3rd, 1965, during the day, he was driving along an isolated stretch of road outside of Santa Ana when he saw a silent, hat-shaped UFO pacing his truck. This object was sending down a white beam of light. He was quite impressed by this, so he tried to radio his supervisor, but the radio went dead, a fact that was later confirmed by his supervisor. Rex Heflin quickly grabbed his Polaroid camera and managed to snap a series of 4 photographs before this metallic disc disappeared off into the haze. At that point, Rex immediately radioed his supervisor again. The radio now worked perfectly. After the incident, he sought no publicity. However, reporters from the United Press International in Los Angeles heard about the photos, and they persuaded him to turn them over for study. He agreed, and the UPI photo experts conducted an extensive analysis even attempting to restage the whole incident at the same area. And after the study, the photo experts at UPI declared them genuine. And as you can see, these photos clearly show a large metallic object hovering an estimated 20 feet above the road. One of these photos actually shows a strange disturbance underneath the object, something like a little dust devil. So Rex Heflin, like many witnesses who have hard evidence of UFOs, did receive a mysterious visit a few weeks later from a man claiming to be from NORAD. The man demanded the photographs. Rex Heflin turned them over. Later, they denied that they ever had or studied the photographs, and the Air Force denounced the pictures as a hoax. In response, NICAP photographic analyst Ralph Ranco and other scientists studied the pictures in detail and also declared them genuine. Today, the Rex Heflin photographs have been very widely published. In fact, journalist and UFO author and investigator Frank Edwards calls the photos, quote, the best UFO photographs in civilian hands. So yeah, while these are controversial, I think these are absolutely genuine photographs and perhaps the best photographs in California. So here's another very controversial photograph, which was taken in Joshua Tree in 1965 by a controversial contactee and rocket scientist Daniel Fry. Daniel Fry claims to have been taken on board a UFO in New Mexico and became a contactee, very well known, and wrote, in fact, 2 books about his case, which somewhat divided the UFO community up to this day. Today, many UFO researchers take his case very seriously. He did manage to capture many excellent photographs and even films of UFO, and this is one of them, which was taken in 1965 over Joshua Tree. So you can make up your own mind about whether or not this is a genuine photograph, but I think it does deserve a place on this list. And moving along through time, we now move to January 24, 1967. This photograph was taken in Yorba Linda at around twilight by a teenager named Tom. He was 14 years old, and he saw this dark, hat-shaped object hovering outside the second-story window of his home. This is a small, relatively isolated town on the edge of Orange County, California. So he quickly rushed to another room to get his little inexpensive Mark 7 fixed focus camera and returned within seconds. By this point, the object had moved farther away from the window, but he was still able to snap one black and white picture before running downstairs, shouting for his family to come and view this strange craft. Unfortunately, by the time they had climbed the stairs, this UFO had moved out of sight. But Tom did have the impression that this object was, quote, gigantic. But he could not really say for sure how big it was because he wasn't quite sure how close it was. But he did have the impression that it was quite close and quite large. It's an excellent photograph. And that same year, on May 11, 1967, a witness was able to take a photograph of a UFO over Torrance, California. There's not a whole lot of information about this photograph, but it was taken on a Saturday night. There were 3 kids, Alan, Bobby, Rick, and Danny, who were hanging out when they saw this object that they said glowed a reddish white. One of the boys had a camera and took this photo, which is a fairly clear shot, but we don't really have a lot of details about it. Still, it's a very interesting photograph. Moving along, this next photograph was taken in August of 1976 over the city of Petaluma, California. And as the witness says, and I quote, "I was shooting Ektachrome film on a warm summer evening north of Petaluma in August of 1976. I shot several exposures in a 5-minute period when I was able to capture this shot. Everything is silhouetted as the sun had already gone down, but this was easily seen. There are 4 blue dots on the flat side of the object, and the edge would tend to show it was moving very quickly." And an enlargement of this photograph shows quite a bit of detail, and a copy was sent in the early 1980s to Walt Andrus, who was the head of MUFON. And as the witness says, "Having this on film and going through some strange events made me a believer. And since then, over the past 20 years, I have seen a few odd things in the sky that keep me looking up." Now here's a very interesting and clear series of photographs. There were actually four photographs taken by Gigi Brobeck over Santa Monica in February of 1979. These are from the files of Joe Clower. And these 2 photographs pictured here are overlooking the Santa Monica Bay. In fact, on the left of the photo, you can actually see the Santa Monica Pier. There's Santa Monica Beach below. These are very clear photos of your typical classic metallic flying saucer, totally silent. And Gigi managed to take 4 photographs as this object moved off into the distance over Santa Monica Bay. This next case is very well verified. It's taken by a trained observer, a pilot. This photograph was taken on July 16, 1988 over San Jacinto, California. And it was taken by John R. English, who is a past director of the International Aerospace Hall of Fame in San Diego Air and Space Historical Center. And at the time of this photograph, he was involved in the research, selection, and installation of several U.S. and foreign astronauts, as well as other significant aviation-related candidates. He was a licensed pilot and a diamond-level soaring pilot for 18 years with approximately 400 flight hours logged, 350 in high-performance sailplanes in multiple flight envelopes and conditions. So he was up there with 2 aircraft and observed this weird anomaly, and it was actually photographed by the chase plane. And I'd like to just quote John English directly. As he says, "I'm a past director of the International Aerospace Hall of Fame, and during several flights, a great deal of time is spent flying in close proximity with other aircraft, necessitating a continual visual search for other aircraft under the C and B scene discipline. And what follows is a brief description and file of an event over Mount San Jacinto in California. A number of photos were taken without anything unusual. Then a bank and turn to the right away from the chase plane was made, and during this turn, both aircraft and chase plane photographed the included anomaly. This object came from the 7 o'clock position relative to the sailplane and at a distance of about 1 to 2 miles in front, and exited vision at the 1 o'clock position relative to the sailplane. The best description I can give is that it looked like a large reflective sphere about the size of a quarter held at arm's length. The object was observed for 5 to 10 seconds until out of sight. No extreme maneuvers were observed, no sound was heard, and no wake turbulence was encountered. I have no idea what the object was, nor have I ever seen anything like it, either before or after this flight. This event took place in July 1988. The original photograph and negative, as well as the flight log, are still in my possession. So this is a very hard to debunk event taken by a pilot with considerable experience, a trained observer, very hard to explain away. Some photographs are taken out of sheer luck by amateurs, such as this next photograph, which was taken in 1991, very close to Los Angeles International Airport, which, by the way, has an enormous amount of UFO activity. I did a whole UFO episode on YouTube of UFOs over LAX. This photograph was taken by Dorothy Drudge. She saw this object hovering at very low altitude. She said it was so foggy on that day, the visibility was very poor, but this object was quite close, quite low, and she saw it flying by. It was totally silent. She quickly snapped a photograph of it, and this object moved off very quickly. She only saw it for a few moments, so it was sheer luck that she was able to capture this very clear photograph of a metallic disc hovering at low altitude. The number of UFO photographic cases is truly astonishing. And for each one that's presented here, there are many others I did not present, so this should just be considered a small sampling. Here's another case involving a UFO photograph. This one comes from Joe Clower, who contributed to the UFO photo archives of Wendell Stevens. I wasn't able to find out a whole lot of information about this particular case, who took the photograph, but it was taken in Los Angeles, California. And as you can see, this is a daylight photo, quite close up, quite low level, of a dark metallic saucer-shaped object. And what I like about this photograph is you can clearly see from the light scattering that this is an object that is some distance from the camera itself. And like many very clear UFO photographs, it's almost as if this object is posing and allowing itself to be photographed. It's certainly an interesting case, even though there isn't a whole lot of information about it. I love this photograph, which was taken in May of 1993 by a woman who does not want her last name known. She's known only by her first name, which is Judy. At the time, there was a huge wave of sightings going on in this area of the Santa Monica Mountains. Judy was in her home in Malibu one evening when she saw a group of about a dozen reddish glowing half discs. And she quickly snapped several photos. This is just one of them, which shows clearly a group of metallic discs moving in over the Santa Monica Bay. And as you can see, these are bright, glowing, disc-shaped objects and have never been explained to this day. Moving along, this next photo was taken on July 6th over the Armagosa Range in California by a gentleman by the name of Jim W. I don't have any other information on this photograph, but I wanted to include it because it's a very clear daylight photo of a metallic disc at low level. 2 years later, in 1998, Michael Davey of Los Angeles was hiking through a remote area in Titus Canyon when he observed a large metallic UFO hovering overhead. He always carried a camera with him on his hikes, and on this occasion, when he saw this disc, he quickly lifted up his camera and was able to obtain one clear photo of this disc as it hovered in the daylight sky over two radar towers in the distance. He turned this photo over to Wendell Stevens, a very well-known UFO researcher who specialized in UFO photographs. This is from the UFO photo archives kept by Wendell Stevens. He had photographic analysts check these pictures out, and there was no evidence of trickery or hoaxing, and he declared them genuine. It's a very clear photo of a metallic disc. So as you can see, year after year, excellent photos are being taken of UFOs over California. Here's a case which occurred in September. This was taken by a contactee by the name of Steve Thompson, and this photograph was taken over Pacific Palisades. This is located in the Santa Monica Mountains, and there's a lot of UFO activity in this area. And it's a very clear photo of a shiny metallic disc hovering right over a residence. Again, this was taken in September of 1996. And it's an excellent photograph of what appears to be an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Here is a photo that was taken again by a contactee, Steve Thompson, over Topanga Canyon, California. I was a resident of Topanga Canyon. I know exactly where this photo was taken. I've been there many times, and in fact, I had my own UFO sighting less than a mile from this area, and I know of several other cases involving UFO encounters in this exact location. And this is a very clear photo taken by Steve Thompson of a UFO over Topanga State Park. This photo is again from the UFO photo archives of Wendell Stevens. And this next photo was taken on January 1st, 2001 over Mammoth Mountain, California by Ron Resnick. He is a computer tech and a professional photographer. And up to this time, this object has never been identified. The taker of this photo, Ron Resnick, says that this photo was taken on his Nikon D1 camera, very expensive camera, $5,000 digital SLR camera. He says the lens was brand new, a Nikkor 17-35 millimeter f2 8D AF-6 EDIF in perfect condition. This is, he says, one of the world's finest wide-angle lenses, and the lens itself cost $1,500, and he bought it just a few days before he took this photograph of this object over Mammoth Mountain. That same year, May 18, 2001, over Foster City, California, this photograph was taken. And all that is known about this photograph is it was taken by a gentleman who calls himself Ilem. And this photographer took several photographs of a UFO seen in the night sky. There are two excellent photographs. And as you can see from the blow-up, it shows what appears to be little portholes. And while these photographs have not been officially analyzed, they show what appears to be a genuine UFO. All right, moving along. April 21st, 2002, San Dimas, California. This object was not seen by the naked eye. It appeared in the photographs after they were taken. This was taken by Aaron Eskridge, and he had a brand new digital camera, and he was snapping a series of shots to put together a large landscape photograph and captured this object. And he showed it around to various newspapers and to JPL and Cal Poly in Sonoma, and they told him that since he did not see it at the time or hear anything, there isn't really much to go upon in terms of analyzing this, which he agrees on. However, as he says, I still think the object in this shot is very typical of what is described as a UFO, and believe it deserves to be posted for others to critique and not buried in my hard drive. Here's another photograph that has gotten quite a bit of publicity. This was taken on the afternoon of January 3rd, 2004 by a gentleman by the name of Young Shiren. He was on the beach of Santa Monica when he observed a metallic disc-like object hovering a few thousand feet directly above a yacht. And this object was stationary in the sky, just sitting there right over this boat. So he quickly grabbed his camera and snapped this photograph. And because he knew approximately the length of this yacht, he estimates that the size of the UFO is probably about 30 feet wide. And after just a few moments, this object darted away at high speed. So clearly not a balloon or a plane or a helicopter or anything like this. And again, this was taken in an area of very high UFO activity. Here is another photograph which is credited to a woman by the name of Jennifer. This was taken on January 29, 2005 over Chula Vista. It was taken with a Canon Mini DV camcorder with 4.0 megapixels. And as the witness says, the photos were taken near my home on January 29, 2005, starting at 5 p.m. and ending at 6 p.m. Jen says she felt this urge to go outside and then saw these objects. She followed this object around in her car for about an hour, and she never drove more than 5 miles away from her home. So it was as if this object was posing for her, which I think they are sometimes doing in these photographic cases. But she was quite impressed and sent it off to UFO researchers. And as you can see, this object is quite impressive. All right, that same year, July 2005, photographs of a UFO were taken over Modesta, California. The witness's name is R. David Anderson, and I'll just quote him directly. As he says, I took some additional photos of this unusual object that had been above my residence at night. This time the craft was towards the south, and the stars in the pictures are a part of the Scorpius constellation. The roof of my house is barely visible in one of the pictures. This places the UFO at fairly low position on the southern horizon. It is remarkable how it appears to be moving at a 30-degree angle towards the ground. Was the craft diving towards some other object that is not visible? I can't really think of any other reason why the craft has such a slant. It has to be moving downwards because its direction of travel is towards the right of the frame. All right, moving along. This next photograph was taken by Watson Morris, who sent his photograph to Coast to Coast. This photograph was taken on December 12, 2005 over Half Moon Bay. And as Watson says, here is the best of about 5 or 6 photos that I took of 3 mysterious discs flying over Half Moon Bay Beach in Northern California last week. I was out shooting some black and white shots of the rocks when I heard some people on the beach yelling to each other to look up in the sky above the water. These disc-type aircraft came from over the rocks very, very slowly. It was hard to tell how high they were, but the closest one didn't seem much higher than 200 feet and then moved out towards the water. The whole sighting lasted no more than 30 seconds. So yeah, some very clear photos. Moving along, 1 year later, February 8th, 2006, these photos were taken by Eduardo Garcia, and credit goes to Ana Luis Cid. These photos were taken with a digital camera, and apparently this was a chance encounter because these UFOs were not noticed at the time when this witness took the photograph. He was taking pictures of the Zeppelin and didn't notice this UFO off in the distance until he developed the photographs. These were taken, again, over Los Angeles at about 5:52 p.m. using a Nikon D70 camera. That same year, April 26, 2006, Modesto, California. A gentleman who wants to remain anonymous, his first name is Johnny, sent these off to the UFO casebook, and as he says, I was feeling pretty good about my captures and went back outside to retrieve my camera and tripod. I had just grabbed the tripod and started to walk back when I noticed a huge reflection in the north by the northwest skies. And I thought to myself, I'm here with my camera and tripod in my hand, so what the hell, let's take a few more shots. I had the camera in burst mode, so I was able to fire off 5 shots instantly, and then came back inside to see if I'd gotten lucky again. The very first shot nearly made me fall out of my chair. It seems to have many of the characteristics of a classic disc. I quickly opened up the small photo program to zoom in on the object and was surprised to see what appears to be a cupola on top of this object. This next photograph again comes from the files of Ana Luis Cid with the collaboration of Alex Sender. These photos were taken by Larry Wexdaz near the towns of Hercules and Vallejo. On July 1st, 2006, at approximately 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, Larry saw this object hovering near some tanks, and he used his Nikon E5200 camera and took these photographs. He sent his report and photographs to Ana Luisa Cid, and as you can see, this photograph appears to show a disc-shaped object. It's a very clear daylight photo. That same year, December 29, 2006, over Santa Cruz, California, John Tisdale was sightseeing and taking photographs along the north coast of Santa Cruz. He was on a back road just south of Bonnie Doon and was taking a photo of this picturesque landscape. The camera was pointing east. He did not see any object in the sky at the time. The camera was a Hewlett-Packard PhotoSmart R967, 10 megapixels in auto mode. The shutter speed was set at ambient lighting conditions. He didn't see it at the time, but it was captured in the photograph. This next photograph was taken by the gentleman by the name of Caesar. This appears in the UFO casebook. This was taken on June 1st, 2007 over Los Angeles. And as Caesar says, I visited the Los Angeles County Arboretum and Botanical Gardens in Arcadia on Friday, June 1st, 2007. My wife and I were looking to find a place to take our wedding pictures, and we found this beautiful park. And we were taking a tour of the place. I snapped several pictures and drove home. When I was downloading the pictures and viewing them, I noticed an object in one of them. I do not know what it is. I am interested to know what it is. I hope you can help me. Please share this object with your listeners. So again, we see that many people who take UFO photos don't actually see them at the time these photos are being taken. The camera can capture things that the eye can't see because these objects are sometimes moving so fast that the eye cannot pick them up, but the camera can. Here's a photograph which was submitted to MUFON, case number 7257. This was taken in 2007 by an anonymous witness, and this was over San Pasquale High School. As the witness says, it was a relatively clear afternoon. My girlfriend and I were at the local high school getting ready to jog on their track. We were on top of a hill that overlooks the stadium when we saw a bright star-like object approach from the east. As it came closer, its shape became more apparent, more boomerang-shaped but very smooth. The top side was made of what appeared to be a highly reflective gold-colored metal. The bottom of the object was the color of dull bronze and didn't seem to reflect the light. I had my backpack with me, and luckily, inside it was my camera. So in haste, I quickly retrieved my camera, ran closer to the object. It made absolutely no sound, and it initially moved very slowly, too slow for an airplane to fly. As it approached us, the object banked to the north, and after about 30 seconds, reversed its direction, revealing its side to us. We watched it for some time as it banked back and forth, and then all of a sudden, it tipped its nose to about a 45-degree angle and quickly ascended out of sight. It was quickly out of sight after about 3 seconds. I wasn't afraid when I saw this object, just fascinated by its erratic movements and its beauty. It was truly a beautiful thing to behold. This next series of photographs created quite a stir. They were taken by a gentleman who leaked them out. His name is allegedly Keith Bradshaw. These were taken in 2007. There is no information about these photos other than that they were taken over China Lake during the day. But what's very interesting about this location is it does have an enormous amount of UFO activity. There's a lot of very high-level rocket testing and aeronautical research going on in this area. In fact, UFO researcher Richard Thompson interviewed a gentleman by the name of Elmer Green who worked at China Lake and said that UFOs appeared all the time. And according to Richard Thompson, and I quote, "In his position, Green frequently heard about incidents in which UFOs flew into camera range during weapons testing and were photographed. He heard about good quality films that had been made of UFOs, and he personally saw black and white still photos of UFOs that were made by people in his group. He was aware of some 40 to 50 professional people who had some connection with UFO sightings made during weapons testing." So maybe that's what's going on here in these photographs. As you can see, one does show a helicopter in flight, but these are very clear, just excellent daylight photos of a very shiny silver metallic disc. All right, moving along. 2009, over San Diego, California. According to the witness, this photo was taken on January 10, 2009, with a camera phone while I was hiking with a friend in San Diego County. The UFO appeared briefly, hovered, and then vanished just as I took the picture. If you zoom in on the picture, you can see an electrical discharge coming out of the high power lines below the UFO. I have seen other UFOs in San Diego, but only at night. This one was up close in broad daylight and scared the heck out of me. According to the witness, the camera was an LG Electronics BG-VX8350. It's an interesting photo, not only because it's a metallic disc, daylight, close-up, low level, but it's hovering over power lines. There are many cases of UFOs hovering over power lines, and UFO researchers speculate that the UFOs are perhaps scooping up the electricity that's being emitted out of these power lines. And this could be good evidence of that, given that you can actually see, just faintly, an electrical discharge above these power lines. All right, moving along. This is an interesting photo, which was again taken during the day over in the Catalina Channel. Again, an area of very high levels of UFO activity. This was taken on February 2009 by Nancy Bradley. And if you look closely, you can see what appears to be a USO diving into the water. So there's some very interesting elements to this photo. Nancy Bradley, the witness, is a seasoned traveler to Catalina. Her family traveled there each year, doing dives with the Catalina Conservancy to help preserve the pristine beauty of the area. And on that day, the water was unnaturally calm. She also said that there were strange, large, random waves. And as she says, and I quote, "This was a very strange behavior for the sea, very strange indeed." And they were about halfway to the island when the steward of the boat pointed out a group of dolphins. And Nancy was amazed. While she had seen dolphins many times and even whales, this display was different because there were hundreds of dolphins as far as the eye could see, and they were jumping frantically. It appeared to her, as she says, they were, quote, seemingly trying to get away from something. And suddenly they disappeared. However, a few miles ahead, the same thing happened. Large numbers of dolphins were swimming at high speed, jumping from the water and diving. And Nancy Bradley could hardly believe what happened next. As she says, and I quote, "A large object, white, almost not detectable from the clouds in the sky, hovered. We watched it as it swayed from side to side, and after about a half minute, it made a beeline, disappearing into the sea." By pure chance, Nancy was snapping a photo at that very moment, this photo that you can see here. And an interesting endnote to all of this, as Nancy Bradley says, they went to Catalina Island and were eating at the local restaurant, and she learned that this area was well known for high levels of UFO activity. As she says, "Several of the locals who overheard our conversation asked to join us at our table, anxious to relate their own stories. They said late at night we see lights going into the bay about a mile out," one gentleman told us, others shaking their heads in agreement. The waitress chimed in. "One night there was a naval ship just offshore patrolling. This is not uncommon. But what I saw that was strange was what went on behind them. Large-scale triangular objects, 3 of them, craft, floating above the ship. And then after circling, they made a quick retreat into the sea. I noticed several small boats showing up shortly after this event, looking for what happened. It is all so strange. A man who has lived there most of his life on the island told us, generally they are white, those craft, he said. And when they hit the water, they turn a light blue. I know because they are fluorescent, and you can see them for a short time going down into the water. So Nancy and her family were very impressed. They had heard of activity in this area, but this was their first sighting, and it left them forever changed. And as Nancy says, "For now we know one thing, there are USOs around Catalina Island. What they are all about, we are determined to find out." Now here's another interesting photo which was taken on October 29, 2011 over Beverly Hills, California. This photo was actually taken by Victoria Beckham, who is Posh Spice of the band Spice Girls. And she insists that she saw and photographed this glowing object over her home. She described it as an extremely bright orb, much too bright to be an airplane light, a star, or the moon. She said it was casting light on the trees below, and it appeared to be fairly close to the ground. She tweeted this photo of the UFO with the following message: UFO hovering above our house last night. And she says that there were other witnesses to this object. Some people have tried to describe this as the moon. I'll let you make up your own mind about it. All right, now we move to 2014. And again, many cases exist in the UFO literature in which people take a photo only to have the UFO shown up that was not seen when they took the picture. So consider this case, which was taken in July of 2014. And I was actually personally contacted by this woman. Her name is Lori. And she contacted me not because she had actually seen this UFO, because this UFO and others were actually showing up in her photographs. Lori says she loves taking pictures. She's an amateur photographer and enthusiast and constantly takes pictures wherever she goes on her digital camera, and occasionally there are glitches on her photographs. But in around 2014, she had taken some photos of what looked like tic-tac objects over Zuma Beach. It was a very crowded day when she took these photos. There were many people on the beach, and when she looked at these two photographs, which were taken one after the other, two of these photographs show a very large tic-tac shaped object apparently leaving the water. And it doesn't look like a glitch. If this were truly a glitch, why would it appear in two separate images in slightly different positions? Again, she never saw anything when she took this photo. No one else on the beach seemed to react to anything, so Lori is still seeking answers about what she photographed. Here's another excellent photographic case. This was taken in March of 2015 by an anonymous witness. As he says, I was driving on Palomar Airport Road in Carlsbad, California, driving to my son's baseball game at 7:15 p.m., and I observed a saucer-like object in the sky through the driver's side window north of my location. Fortunately, I had my DSLR with me because of the baseball game, so I rolled my window down and took 3 pictures in rapid succession. My daughter and I both watched it until we were forced to proceed with traffic, and it was gone. So we first thought it might be a drone, but after examining the photos, he is reconsidering and thinks it may be an actual UFO. This next series of photographs were taken that same year on September 1st, 2015 at 3 o'clock p.m. And what's really interesting is these photographs were taken in the vicinity of San Quentin Prison. As I talked about in a previous YouTube episode, there are a lot of cases of UFOs hovering over prisons. This was right next to the prison near the San Rafael Bridge, near Court Madera. And as the witness says, not quite sure how to start other than to tell you what I saw today. I was driving over the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge from work towards Corte Madera, California today, and I saw this extremely bright, almost chrome-like sphere hovering over San Quentin prison. It had a little bit of a blue hue to it, and it looked like it was rotating or pulsing. I couldn't pull over on the bridge and lost sight of it behind the hill. I was sure I'd catch it in the pass between the bridge and Larkspur Landing. So much so, I got out of my car at the shooting range there and was perplexed that it wasn't there. I got back in my car, hoping to see it again. I was looking all over, and I saw it over by the village shopping center south of the 101. I lost sight of it at the hill next to the parking lot because it was heading towards Mount Tam. It was very low in the sky. I was looking frantically to my left and only glanced to my right to turn off the freeway and spotted it on the opposite side on my far right between me and the north hill of Corte Madera. I pulled over immediately and used my work iPad to quickly snap 5 photos in rapid succession. After 15 to 30 seconds, it appeared to almost fade into itself and disappear. I sat there baffled. The pictures don't show how bright this thing truly was. It was like looking into the sun. All right, 1 year later, May 24, 2016. An anonymous gentleman took these photographs at around 6:30 a.m. when he stepped out of his home in Carlsbad. He could see the ocean as well as San Clemente Island and Catalina, and as he says, I always look out to the ocean for the view, but today I saw something I had never seen before. Way out on the horizon, I noticed a glow on the water. At first glance, I thought it was the sun's reflection as it was really bright, but that would have been impossible due to the sun's position at the time. Plus, it was clearly sitting on top of the water. It looked like a large strip of light. My wife also saw the object. At first, he thought it might be a cruise ship, though he'd seen cruise ships and he'd never seen one out there before, and it certainly didn't look like one. He grabbed his binoculars and got a close-up look at it. It was just a strip of light. It clearly wasn't a cruise ship. As he says, I didn't see any body of structure, just bright lights, either one long, large one or many very close together to form a strip. It didn't move. And after he confirmed that this was unexplained, he got his camera and snapped this photo. He watched it for a few minutes, went inside briefly, returned outside. 5 minutes later, and the object was gone. So if it was a ship, it would have been seen, you would think, in a nearby location. But it had disappeared rather quickly, so yeah, perhaps it's unexplained. All right, just a few more cases I'd like to share with you. This next case took place on 2017, and I will just quote the witness directly. When I looked through the binocs, I have 2 pair, one with a stabilizer, one with extra magnification. I expected to see lanterns, flares, balloons, or even drones or skydivers. Instead, what I saw were sparkling rings of smoke that had some shape and apparent structure, but they spun like tops in the sky as they moved. They almost had a jellyfish-type body that seemed to pulse and was translucent. Here's a very excellent and clear photograph of a UFO over Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is on the border of California and Nevada. And this photo taken here is actually a still from a moving film. The witness says she took this on October 20th, 2018. And as she says, we went to Lake Tahoe for vacation. We got a tour on a boat to ride on the lake. I didn't see the object until we got home. I was checking the video, and this object appeared on the video. It moved with great speed. It appeared for about 18 seconds on the video, and she provided the 18 seconds of video. The entire video itself was about 10 minutes long, and it does look like one person actually did see this object, but all they know is that these photographs were taken on vacation, and the lady said she had to reduce the speed of the video to about 20% to be able to actually see the UFO. This next case occurred in the same year. It was taken in December, and this is also a moving film. This is a still frame of several strange bright orbs which were filmed in the sky above Mojave Desert in California. And according to the witness, this was a, quote, major sighting, clear video footage of light orbs in the desert disappear into the air. They appeared suddenly out of the blue after a meditation at Crystal Hill at Giant Rock. This is the last few seconds caught just before they disappeared. It was stunning and beautiful. Following a group meditation as we walked down Quartz Crystal Hill at Giant Rock in the Mojave Desert, these light orbs suddenly appeared. The next case I'd like to talk about, I don't have a whole lot of information about it other than it was taken in January 2020 in Woodville, California. And this photograph shows what appears to be a huge unidentified flying object in the sky. The last case I'd like to present created quite a sensation on the internet when it was posted, and this is actually from a moving film. This was taken on October 30th of 2020 by a motorist who was walking along the 29 Palms Highway. This is near Mount San Jacinto in the direction of Palm Springs, California, and it shows a very large glowing disc-shaped UFO. Again, this created quite a sensation. This object has not been identified and appears to be your classic UFO. So there you go. Those are 50 cases involving UFO photographs over California alone. I did include a very small sampling of these in my book, UFOs over California, but certainly not the whole list of 50 that I presented here. And as you can see, some of these are really quite impressive and I think very hard to debunk. For example, the Battle of LA in 1942. There's no way you can say that didn't happen. Many other really good cases. I think the case involving the photo of UFOs over Catalina Island, which is actually taken from moving films, that took place in 1956 and was photographed by a professional photographer, Leland Hansen. Very hard to debunk. The 1959 photo by a Navy pilot, Frank Kinsey, of a UFO over Lake Casitas. I think that's a real good, legitimate case. There was other witnesses there. He's a fantastic witness. Another case that is really hard to debunk or explain away is the case involving Rex Heflin in 1965 in Santa Ana. These photographs are, I think, probably the best photographs taken in California, and no one has ever been able to debunk those. And many others. I mean, the case of John English in 1988 is another really good case. So I really wanted to present these photos to you today to show that there is, in fact, a lot of evidence. In fact, I think you could probably pull up the same number of photographs for each and every state in the United States, and for that matter, any location on this planet. So yeah, there is photographic evidence of UFOs. That's why I wanted to present this episode to you today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to thank you once again for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep having fun.